So now we're just going to look at a few general principles that will hold true across the tape. We're going to look at your breathing, your weight shifting and your core stability and how these apply to your technique. Power is mass, the mass of your body, times velocity, how fast you move it, squared. That's the physics lesson over. Basically, I can't change the mass of my body in the next 2 seconds, but I can affect the velocity, the speed. The more relaxed I am, the faster I will be able to travel and the more kinetic energy I'm going to get flowing. I said that was the end of the physics lesson, I'll leave it there. How to do this? As I mentioned previously on the stance, I'm always going to be moving forwards and through my target, travelling with my whole body's weight as opposed to being sat on the back foot. If I am looking to find range or I'm working evasively, I'm moving away as an opponent comes in, then yes, my weight will be on the back foot. Any techniques I'm throwing there are more range finding or point scoring techniques, or simply adding as a distraction to enable me to move off to a better angle where I can step back in and hit, more destructively with some more powerful techniques. So we talked about being relaxed so that we can generate more speed or velocity. We've talked about shifting our weight physically in terms of moving through our target with our stance. The important muscles are the muscles of the core. These are the muscles that really deliver the blow. If you think that your hand or your foot or your knee or your elbow, whichever point you're striking with, is more like a chisel, it's only making the connection with the target. And your core, your hips, your shoulders, the muscles of the torso, the glutes, massively important, and the lower back, they're your hammers. They're the ones that are actually providing the force. Firstly, the double hip motion. Anybody that's sort of trained in traditional karate for any length of time will have come across this in the basic Yakuzuki reverse punch. You don't just drive forwards and through your target, you'd actually pull your hip back and drive through. A good analogy that I use with my students, and one that, for instance, kids particularly will pick up on, is if you think of throwing a ball, how you throw a ball downfield. You would not step forward and throw a ball arm and hip together. You'd firstly shift your weight forwards and through the target on a diagonal angle. You've got your 45-degree stance there. Your hip on your throwing side would be cocked back. You'd push from the toe, the heel would turn out, you'd turn through the ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, and the arm would be relaxed until the moment that you let go of that ball. Then there'd be a little bit of muscle involved at the point of throwing. And throwing a punch is exactly the same, or a kick for that matter. From here, as I'm travelling forwards and through my target on a 45 degree, I'm pulling my hip back. I don't pull my shoulder back as I do so. This is telegraphing the move, that's also exposing my chin. So I'm looking to move the hip very rapidly and very ballistically, but keep my guard nice and tight and try and have as little upper body movement as possible. Okay. My arm is relaxed until the moment of impact, when I'm trying to tense every muscle in my body, right from my toes to the top of the head. But it's not a push. I'm looking for impact, I'm looking for maximum energy transfer. The longer my hand or my foot stays in contact with the target, the more of that shock is earthed. It travels back down my arm, down my leg to the floor, it's gone, it's wasted. The other thing that's going to allow the shock to be earthed, that's supposed to transfer into my opponent, is if my core is soft on the impact, which is why we breathe. As I strike the target, I personally like to use the word ITS, I-T-S, but without the I, so just tss. Now, if you try this at home, if you pop your fingers onto your abdominal muscles and you make that sound sharply, tss, you'll feel a sharp contraction of your core muscles, of your abdominals. At the moment of impact, I want everything to be tensed. I then want to relax immediately and pull off the target. That doesn't mean I ever aim to just hit the surface of a target. Whenever I'm striking, I'm always aiming 6 inches through the target. I want to drive through as much as possible, contracting my core on the moment of impact, and the second I feel that I've driven through as much as possible, I'm going to pull off, and hopefully as much of that shock is transferred into my opponent as possible. If you're talking about creating a knockout, you need that shock, that sharp energy transfer to have any kind of concussive effect. Also, as a side note, shots that come from angles and hit the side of the jaw are much more likely to have a concussive effect than straight shots, but we'll come back to that at a later date. In regards to tensing the core, another good example, if you can imagine that I was lifting a weight and maybe pressing a barbell straight above my head. As I lift from the ground this way, I press the muscles up above my head. It's the muscles of the core that are holding me in place. In effect, what I'm doing, by tensing my core muscles, I'm turning my body into a kind of a fulcrum really, against the ground that my muscles work against. If I'm soft in the middle, and my core muscles are loose, and I'm trying to push upwards, I'm going to lose the energy from the technique, and I'm unlikely to be successful in the lift. It's exactly the same when you're throwing a punch. At the moment of impact, if I hit and these muscles are soft, I'm going to lose a lot of energy this way. So at the moment of impact, you want to be tensed from the toe to the point of the fist or foot or knee or elbow that's making the connection. You then want to relax immediately and pull away as fast as possible to try and get that energy transferred. That's a general rule. We do strike differently at times. If you are striking downwards on a grounded opponent, for instance, or if you are throwing kicks into the legs or the body, obviously the legs are heavier, and if you are striking, for instance, an opponent's leg and they've based it, they've put the weight on it, or if you're striking into the body where there isn't so much of, obviously with the torso being a larger mass, there's not that kind of compensation that there is in the head in terms of the movement. So you can use a different type of energy when you're striking. We'll cover that later. So I shall use my lovely assistant Steve to demonstrate. If I've managed to get this kind of a position during a match and I am able to strike down, I don't want to be pulling off the same way on my feet. Basically, especially if his head's in contact to the ground and I connect, the shock will still earth, but the quicker route's through his head. It's not going to travel back through my body. I've got gravity on my side. So instead of sort of striking and pulling off, short explosive movements and tensing the core, this time I'm actually going to deliberately leave my hand or my elbow on for a little bit. Think of it more like a very fast push. So I'm hitting more like I'm trying to knock a nail through a piece of wood than I would on the feet, explosively and pulling off and aiming for that maximum energy transfer, because he's got nowhere to go. Again, from a stand-up point, if you're striking to the torso or you're striking to a leg and the opponent's got his weight on that leg, there's going to be less movement, there's going to be less body compensation, they're going to absorb more of that kinetic energy. So there isn't so much need for the pull-off. You can go with the heavier kind of limp arm, limp leg, dead weight kind of a strike.